So, Mike, ever since you have, I'm clicking the button. Ever since you mentioned that you look like an 8-year-old boy, I can like not unsee it in looking at your photo. Anytime
I'm
I look
very
at,
young looking.
yeah, I didn't like I guessed, but I hadn't like put that together. And now, anyways, it is Tuesday, September 28th, 2021, 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's a Mike Chase original dog shirt day. Uh, I think I fucked that up.
Yeah, I think it's a Mike Chase day and an original dog shirt day.
But
Oh
actually,
yeah.
my birth name, she's actually right. My original birth name was Mike Chase Original Dog Shirt.
That's right.
But it was hyphenated.
Yeah, because
Chase.
it's a mouthful.
Yeah.
We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to, as I sent to Mike Chase today, make jokes about the FBI crime statistics.
Murder's up 30%.
It's shocking.
And we're going to joke about it.
So are some of my stocks. I have some stock picks
See?
that are up
He's already
30%.
You're off.
Right, up is good, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm going to retire because they are up today.
Oh my God. So glad you're here, Mike.
Today is not a good example of that, but yeah.
What was the story I was going to tell?
Yeah, you're going to talk about the crime that your doorman has committed.
Yeah. So
that's going to be the monologue today.
Yeah. So
Doorman
one of the
crimes.
So one of the this is pretty great. So one of the great parts about our apartment is somehow there is a 24-hour real doorman, not like a virtual doorman like they try to give you, like they're giving all the kids these days. This is like an actual human being that like is very bored for at least 8 hours at a time, but they rotate. So, you know, anyway, one of the new doormen, who I will call Mike, was yesterday I was leaving after doing the show, and I noticed that there was an individual trying to turn into the corner, turn into like our street, and had missed the street entirely in their SUV and was just very slowly driving onto the sidewalk, like at people that were like standing there. And everyone is flipping out and kind of screaming. And like a lot of us are like standing. It was like it's around a construction site, so there's lots of people around and just like really confused. And this person just seems like completely unperturbed and puts the car into reverse, almost hitting two bikes that are driving behind him. And I'm like, that guy looks a lot like my doorman, but he's not on right now. Why is this guy here? Like, that couldn't possibly be him. It must be somebody else. And so then there's this mysterious, very vague message from our management company saying that the doorman has been fired. The next day, we get this message. And I go down to get the goss from the other doorman. Like, what's going on? He goes,
call
well,
him
yes.
Chase.
Yes, we'll call him Chase. And so Chase is like, well, Mike actually loves the marijuana and got completely baked and then fell asleep in the middle of the day on his shift. Like at 1:00 in the afternoon, was just passed out with his head back in the chair, and a number of people had to wake him up. He then proceeded to eat somebody else's food in the building that had been ordered. Like, so someone had placed an order and like the delivery got dropped off and he just like consumed it.
One of the advantages to being the doorman.
I know. This is the funny part. This is like the Cheech and Chong part. It gets really dark. So then all of a sudden, so I guess Mike then proceeds to go out to his car and fall asleep for 5 hours. And then wake up and drives over the thing. He comes back into the apartment building and goes into the package closet, and he takes a giant butcher knife and he opens up 4 packages and takes their contents and then leaves. And upon being called to be fired by the management company this morning, apparently said, hello, is there a problem? and so anyway, that was my entertainment for the day. And my brush with crime statistics. And so, no, this is never tell the lies. I do not tell lies. I am terrible at them.
Kate couldn't make up this story.
I couldn't make up the story. There's really not the best attempt I could ever have at like the truth and lie story would basically be to take somebody else's story and try to tell it as my own, because I just like couldn't. I'd have to pretend. But I thought about this a lot. But anyways.
But I have a federal crime question for Mike Chase based on this story, but he has vanished.
Yeah, there's a bunch of federal crimes in there, right?
Well, there's some marijuana crimes that don't seem very interesting.
Yes.
But there's
I was talking about the
theft of the mail package crime. But we need Mike back to discuss this with him.
I know. I don't know where he went. He's accepting and connecting. He's coming back. But anyways, that was my exciting brush with crime statistics in my own backyard. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad everyone is safe, and that the package thieving doorman with the giant butcher knife attacked.
Like, right?
Packages.
Why also was there a giant butcher knife like lying around?
Yeah,
I have no idea. Isn't that?
One.
Yeah. So I really do like the part of the story in which like he just like he like wakes up from his nap. This is how I'm imagining it. Wakes up from his nap, is very hungry and stoned, and like he's awakened by a delivery man dropping off food, and he's like, "Manna from heaven, this is for me."
Mike
and like
says
eats
he's
it
very
all.
here.
I don't see Mike.
Well,
Do
he's
you?
in the chat.
No, hold on. I'm going to remove you, Mike, and bring you back in. Sorry.
So I'm going to describe the question for Mike Chase.
He can hear it.
Yeah, he can clearly hear.
Okay.
So if the mail has already been delivered and it is being held by now the building management company, and the mailman steals it, but from the point of view of the U.S. Postal Service, it has already been delivered. Is it a federal crime for the guy to rip it off?
Yeah, the statute the statute actually prohibits purloining and intercepting of mail. And I would say that this is a combination.
Is, by the way, a cut of meat. You know, like you can grill it.
It's a cut of cat meat, actually. That's why they call it a purloin. And it's delicious. I think. Yeah.
Really
I just got that. I got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a dad, so like, what am I going to do? The mail theft statute prohibits purloining and intercepting mail prior to it being delivered to its ultimate recipient, its intended recipient. So the intermediary there of the doorman, he doesn't get like dibs on mail. It's very much mine.
I was trying to figure out whether he had any good arguments here.
So
it's a good example. That's one of the earliest examples of criminal justice reform, though, is like the reduction in penalties from mail theft. I mean, mail theft was like one of the first like major capital federal offenses. You would hang for mail theft. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And in fact, it's one of the first crimes where we tested this theory about whether or not you could refuse a presidential pardon. So one of the earliest people to get a presidential pardon was a mail thief, and his cohort was sentenced to death and executed. And so he said, yeah, look, I don't think I should get a presidential pardon just because I'm well-connected and I have a well-connected family. And he refused a presidential pardon for mail theft and was sentenced to death. Yeah.
I want to continue this for one quick second, which is, this is super interesting to me. This line drawing around when like you can be accused of tampering with mail, because there are two things in the law that one is for the purposes of delivery for notice. There is the mailbox rule, which is like literally if it's in your mailbox, it like counts as being delivered. Right. So that's kind of, obviously that's just for like civil procedure and notice.
Oh, I mean, if it's in the sender's mailbox, it's delivered, right?
Yes.
I mean, the mailbox rule in contract law is like, did I accept it and put it in my mailbox? Not did you ever get it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, so that's kind of interesting. And then two is, I'm kind of curious, is like for the purposes of when I am notified of having mail and like when they stop tracking is when my doorman signs for the package. And so then I almost think of it. and eats it.
I think you cannot argue that the Thai restaurant owes you
the Thai
food,
restaurant. Yeah,
because the doorman received it and consumed it.
but my question is like,
You're
it
on the
would
hook
strike
for
me
that.
as it would turn into a bailment, like like where you kind of give something. No.
Yeah, the problem with bailment is, what's your right of recovery?
No, exactly. Well, no, it would
is
take.
to sue, is to sue
Yeah.
the doorman for Thai food. Yeah,
Yes.
that's your.
Well, no, but like to sue them for the federal packages. I mean, like, I don't know. I think that's kind of, I don't know. There has to be. It has to be in the hands of the intended recipient. It has to be like the person. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Well, I mean, yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
here is the key question. Murders are up 30% year over year, 2019 to 2000, the biggest recorded increase in history. What's funny about this?
Well, look, I mean, these are all murders that were supposed to happen in the previous year. Okay, I mean, these are like these murders were due. They just got postponed due to COVID. Okay, so these people were supposed to die ultimately, I think.
That's not funny.
What?
It's true.
Jesus. Oh my God.
All right.
It's just
Kate,
true.
what do you think is funny about a 30%?
I don't think there's anything.
murder?
No, but there's nothing funny about it unless you zoom out and you look at murders historically for the last 10 years, and you look. What's funny is the people in Twitter bending themselves into knots to say that like everybody's getting murder right now. If you zoom out and you look back, going back to 2000, go back to 2010,
Or 94.
murder is like murder's way down, like way down, and so I think like realistically maybe we were artificially depressed in terms of like human nature. Human nature just
overdue for a
well, that's what I'm
lot of
saying.
murders.
I mean, when I say that these are people that were supposed to die in the previous year, the truth is that like that is human nature, unfortunately, right? Are we going to eradicate murder? I think not. But the truth is that when you look at human nature in a long curve, we're actually doing very, very well. And I made the reference to the stock market earlier. The reason that like right now, if you go onto any financial show right in the morning, they're going to say we're due for a correction, we're due for a complete pullback in the stock market. The only reason that they say that is because statistically we haven't gone this long without a 5% pullback in the stock market. Now, when you have a pullback of 5% right now, you're still going to have a Dow at a ridiculously all-time high, and murder really fundamentally isn't all that different. So I don't think that the murder statistics are all that impressive. I think that there is some interesting stuff, which we've got some time. We'll talk about some of the other interesting stuff that's in the FBI crimes statistics. But I think in terms of murder, really what you fundamentally have is a bunch of people that are going to try and somehow say that a Biden administration is responsible for people getting murdered. Or they're going to say
this took place under the Trump administration.
Yeah, right. Or you're going to say that there's people that are going to say the Trump administration was responsible for it. You can't fundamentally turn these crime statistics into a political point. You're not going to be able to do it if you tie it back to sort of the economic stressors that lead to this. If you look at just the ebbs and flows of murder statistics. You're not going to be able to make a political point out of it. It's just that people will try. They will try to say there's an erosion of human morals. They will try to say, that there's some sort of systemic intervention that we need in order to prevent murder. But these FBI crime statistics really fundamentally, particularly with things like murder, don't actually tell us all that much. And there's a couple of other ghosts in the data that are responsible for that too that we can talk about as we go on.
Ghosts of the dead murdered people?
No, ghosts in the data. I mean, quirks in the data that I think create an unreliable. I think that they create an unreliable result.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you were making a good joke that went over.
Ben, go ahead. Do either of you have something that you would recommend that I can link to for everyone to kind of look at what that summarizes this in a reliable way?
Well, the FBI has a good site on it, just the uniform crime statistic. But there's a good data visualization of it. Oh, Mike beat me to it.
Perfect.
So I want to argue that the murders are actually a big deal and an interesting data point, which is that I don't remember this data in detail, so I'm going to make it up. But it's pretty, what I'm describing is in general accurate. The murder rate in the United States peaked in 1993-94 and has been on unbelievably sharp and steady decline since then. And then all of a sudden, with a couple of blips, but it's been on like a 25-year decline. And then all of a sudden, last year, violent crime ticks up 6% and murders go up pretty sharply. It seems to me that something is different that is worthy of policy notice. Now, there's, in my view, only really two possibilities. One is the pandemic and the associated economic trauma, and the other is the controversies over policing and what Jim Comey described a number of years ago and got a lot of heat for calling the Ferguson Effect. Whether you want to call it that or just say police are backing off because of criticism, or there's some big change in policing going on. Communities are maybe being less policed. I'm not sure there's two other macro explanations for a sudden dramatic change in outcome. Curious what either of you think about that and whether we should be looking to other explanations for this effect.
Well, should we be looking to? I mean, specifically when you talk about policing, I mean, you have to have some faith that policing is a meaningful deterrent to homicides, right? If we're focusing on homicide, and you have to assume that either stuffing more police into communities is going to deter murder, or you have to believe that some fundamental change in the manner of policing is going to deter murder as well, right? And
no, you could merely assume, for example, that I think you can describe it a number of ways. One is a difference in policing. Another would be a difference in attitude toward policing and law enforcement and compliance in the wake of the scandals of gross police abuse and murder with respect to individuals and people of color. Another is some combined effect. But my point is that if you think about 2020 versus 2019, there are these two big things that are different. And some combination, one of them is the pandemic and the economy.
Yeah.
The other is, that we had this huge debate over policing. And then you see this big change in violent crime. I think it's pretty far-fetched to me to say, well, this is an effect that's unrelated to either of those.
I think you're stabbing in the dark. And again, that is not a pun at all. And I will say it is not a pun because the majority of these homicides were with handguns. Okay, if they were knife deaths, then stabbing in the dark would be a problem. You're shooting in the dark. But I will say that I think that this, criminal defense attorneys have been arguing about this for a long time because. And public policy folks, folks in the criminal justice reform community, about how these FBI statistics are uniformly twisted and relied upon to make arguments that are sort of baseless and that you really can't divine much. I mean, a great example is that if you look at the expanded homicide data, right, and you talk about the victim circumstances, right, in which why did a person become a victim of homicide based on the data? Out of these, the top three, I will read the top three categories, and by huge measure, the number one category is all instances where the facts provided do not permit determination of the circumstances. That's 135,000 of these cases. The next highest category is other arguments, and then the next category is other. Okay, then you get into robbery, gang killings, narcotics. But you're talking about several 100,000 of these. The largest segment of these are divided into other where you can't determine the circumstances, and other arguments.
This is exactly what I was going to ask.
This becomes a problem because people are just looking at the net effect. Oh my God, murders are up. What does the FBI know about those murders? By huge measure, they don't know much at all about them at all. Then you also have to look even deeper into the data, right? And they have a ranking system. Okay, so when something gets classified as a homicide, there are oftentimes many other crimes that are charged that don't become the principal crime that drives how this gets counted in the data. And so, in all likelihood, you may find that there are homicides in which there are multiple defendants. There is some correction for that part of the data, but you may also find out that these are arrests. You may also find out that there are not convictions. And so what does that tell us about it? What about conspiracies? What about felony murders? Things along those lines that get baked into this data and make it a little bit confusing. Now, does that change the overall effect that murders are up or homicides are up 30%? I don't know. I mean, there's still a lot of people that have been the victim of these violent crimes and have unfortunately lost their lives. But to draw conclusions, or for the FBI to say that there's some policy prescription that can come out of this,
I think the FBI has made any policy.
No, they usually don't. No, in fact, they're usually explicit that they don't. But sort of the subtle notion is that I think and look, this may be the defense attorney's perspective. I think the subtle notion has long been that more law enforcement will be better and more law enforcement activity will be the solution to increases in crime, even when they don't say it explicitly, because they probably know that they can't say that based on any of the data. I think the notion is always, look, if we can stuff more law enforcement personnel into these communities, crime will go down.
So I want to let's get into, so I'm looking at, I just was kind of, while you were talking before, I was looking at kind of some of the data from this and taking a look at it and trying to see where I could deconfabulate it or get specific about what exactly was going on with all of these different variables. And it does not, what you said is exactly right, which is like, my big question was, is there any way to focus in on the amount of this that is domestic violence? It strikes me as like, especially likely in 2020, in an incredibly literally lockdown, like that there was an increase, in domestic violent homicides. And like, not that we should those are still homicides. They're just, my point is that the distinction makes a big difference in policing. That you're not going to get fewer domestic violent homicides by putting more policemen on the beat. Like, that's just simply not what's going to happen. I guess response time, if 911 or something is called, is important. So like proximity and like things like that, and available police forces. But generally speaking, just the mere presence of police in an area is not going to have a deterring effect at all. And so one of the things that really strikes me about this data is that they don't specify that. And and as you said, but why not? It seems like these are completely different numbers. With completely different policy directives. If you figure that out.
You're right. If you drill into the data, you will see that they do have it broken out by the relationship to the offender, and there is a significant, statistically enough that you can see the segment of the data that is a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a husband, a wife, or a daughter or a son. However, I will say that this is again going back to the reliability and the ability to draw any kind of conclusions from the data. By huge measure, the largest segment of victim relationship is listed as unknown. Over 100,000 of them are listed as unknown relationship. Now, does that mean that they didn't know each other? No, because we have another category for strangers, right, where they know it was a stranger. But there's a huge percentage in which this data is just not really telling us what the relationship is between the killer and the person who was killed.
Okay,
And
so I think that's
yeah.
a totally fair point, but I just pulled up the aggregate homicide numbers over time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the best data set we have on murder body counts in the United States, because all local law enforcement is required to report incidents to the Bureau for purposes of the uniform crime data. And I think, what we see here is pretty interesting. So you have, as I remembered, this peak at almost 24,000, 23,000 murders in 1993, 94, 93 actually is the peak. And then it comes down with this rise right around, the early aughts, a sort of gentle rise, but it actually comes down to just over 12,000 in 2014. So it literally halves over the course of 20 years. And then there's a 2-year rise, which people will remember. This is the period when there was that controversy in the Obama administration because Comey said the words, talked about the possibility that there was a Ferguson effect. And then this startling rise between 2019 and 2020. Now, if you sum these two rises up, even with the decline in between, that takes away literally half of the decline from the early 90s. And so I think it is fair to ask as a policy question, what, and I take your point, Mike, that the data don't really answer this question. And I'm not saying the answer is more law enforcement, and I'm not saying the answer is, greater incarceration. I do think the major explanation for the decline after 93 had to do with the waning of the crack epidemic, not with policy. But I do think anybody, if you're going, like, just as a matter of criminology, we need to be asking the question, because that's like 12,000 people. The delta between the high and the low is 12,000 lives a year. We used to think that was a lot of people before we started losing 2,000 a day to COVID. And I do think it's worth asking, like, well, what were we doing differently in 2014 that, made those numbers different than they are today?
I mean, I think that the smart money is probably on what were we doing. We were in a time of relative, and again, I'm not saying everyone, but I'm saying of relative economic prosperity in the United States. If you look at the data where you do get into the homicides where we actually can peg a circumstance and the nature of the victim, the nature of the offender, we know that a significant portion of them are burglaries. We know that a significant number of them are drug-related homicides. Those are both at their core economic crimes when you think about it. Okay. Now, does every drug user, does every drug distributor kill somebody? No, they don't. Does every burglar kill somebody? No, they don't. But when these crimes culminate in a homicide, it is at its root an economic crime. The person is there engaged in illicit activity that is of such a pitched nature that a person ends up dying because the underlying motivation is to fill some economic need. And so
Do you
I
know
think
of any cheese crimes that end in homicide?
zero. But I will say that a
Well,
federal,
if it is, it's a very long death of heart disease.
well, okay, but that's that I would say is the most protracted crime of passion, and in that case, the killer is not the fromagier. The criminal is also the victim. I think in those cases, yeah.
But I mean, I think that I completely agree with Mike's point here, and I think that that's so even like you posing the questions, what were we doing in 2014? Is I think exactly the wrong question, because this homicide that assumes that the amount of homicide is completely in proportion to the inaction or actions of criminal unit, criminal investigators or criminal enforcement, and that or law. Yeah. So
I don't think that's right.
No. But
I mean, go ahead. But I want to reserve disagreement on that point.
Right. But I think that what Mike is saying and what I'm agreeing with is that, and when I said confounding here, I really mean confounding in the very scientific sense, which is that these variables are completely overlaid. And like economics or anything else in the real world, when you have some type of action or event and then X, Y, and Z happen, you assume it's because of your intervention, when in fact it could also be the fact that other world events happened in addition to your intervention, and those are what kind of really account for the change, right? And so to me it seems much more law enforcement, to me, either presence or detection or new regulation or whatever, seems to me to be much more you have to get into the specific cause and environment of the crime. And if you're not doing that, you're just throwing bodies onto the street, like police bodies, to do policing without I just yeah. So it just really strikes me that that there was an increase in detection and reporting of of certain types of deaths in 2014 and 2014 to 2016, and now there was probably, I think, a very a really huge increase. If we looked, I would bet $100 that there has been a disproportionate increase in what we would call domestic violence, or among these homicides, and that they account for a lot of it.
Okay, so I want to disagree with one of the premises there. It seems to me that you're detaching the policy environment from crime, or from murder, except in the context of domestic violence. And I'm not sure that's right. We've had very substantial changes in policy over the last 5 years. They have not all gone in the same direction. So we have this very brutal political environment. We have a whole lot of economic deprivation that's been caused by the pandemic. We've had a pretty significant debate about policing and a lot of associated criminal justice reforms, much of which I very much support. And we've had as well functional decriminalization of a lot of low-grade drug use in much but not all of the country. Now, I'm skeptical that that is an explanatory variable because uh, uh, the data do seem to be quite nationwide, and they don't seem to correlate with areas of greater decriminalization. But I do think the policy environment matters, and I agree with you that everything's overdetermined. But I think the value of the field of criminology is to try to isolate some of those variables and to try to figure out what policy interventions work and hurt.
Yeah, I mean, look, I will say that just from the homicide cases that I've been involved in.
And just to be clear, you were involved in the conduct of those
after
homicides?
the fact. Yeah, after the fact as a criminal defense lawyer. But I will tell you, the ones that I've seen in the courts, the ones that I've seen where you've had a robust opportunity to question witnesses, where you've had a robust opportunity to hear from, social workers, therapists, forensic psychologists who've been able to look into the situations, and then been able to watch police interviews and confessions, and really sort of triangulate the data. The one area where this FBI statistics jibes with everything that I've seen play out in the court system is that these are overwhelmingly males. They're overwhelmingly male victims. They're overwhelmingly under the age of 30, and by a lot. They're young people, oftentimes with underdeveloped, brains. They haven't aged, they haven't matured, and their impulse control is lower at that age. There are significant factors surrounding a young populace that you're not seeing this in people who get an opportunity to mature into an adulthood. So, I mean, I think in terms of a policy prescription,
aging powder.
The data, the aging powder. Yeah, sure. If that was one solution, but the answer is give folks an opportunity to successfully reach adulthood with resources and a reasonable degree of economic security.
Fewer men.
And yeah, I guess you could say fewer men. No, I think you would say get men into a more stable environment in which they're not. They're not feeling compelled. They're not getting into these situations in which some sort of heat of the moment impulse causes them to have a violent confrontation. No, so I think the answer is you have to focus on the younger community and try and get them into adulthood successfully and with a relative degree of economic security, and that will address a significant percentage of these homicides.
Okay, well, I was going to go to Ev, but she has now disappeared. And I don't know, I'm having trouble reducing her. So I'm going to bring in Paula. And Paula's question is very good. Hi, Paula.
Hi. So my question is, now that I've started law school, I'm starting to see that some of the arguments that I come up with in my head, when I say them out loud, especially when my professor makes me talk them out, sound really fucking stupid. And I realized this when I was typing out a defense the other day. Are you
contemplating crime as a response to that?
No.
Like any professors at risk of homicide as a result
I love all of my professors.
Yeah, I would advise you to leave. I would advise you to say that, and yes, that's a good.
Yes,
good.
They're all amazing. But then I was writing out a defense for a class, and I started writing it out, and I had to change my mind several times, because some things I realized if your client commits a crime as a result of a joke that went badly, you're gonna sound stupid in court. I think most of the time, some things when you say them don't sound good. And maybe it's because I'm a student, or maybe all lawyers go through that, or maybe I'm not making sense because Kate's looking at me.
No, I'm trying to understand what you mean exactly. Do you mean when you say you're gonna sound stupid in court if you say what? If you say it was a joke gone bad?
Right. I had one it was a case, and it was supposed to be this person that was taking revenge on their ex, and typing that out as an argument, as a very lighthearted thing to do, like sounded really stupid when I went to go write that as a defense. Well, it was supposed to be a lighthearted joke. Does that make sense?
Well, look, I mean, sometimes you do have this play itself out in the court system where people do boneheaded things. Judges generally recognize the boneheaded things. I mean, you have somebody. The best example I can think of is these public indecency cases or trespassing cases where you have somebody streak at a public sporting event, right? And so the criminal defense lawyer has to go in there and just say, hey, look, this was a youthful indiscretion. It was really stupid. Oftentimes judges will get that. But here's another example, right, which went the other way.
Particularly the judges who are sitting in court with no robes.
They
tend to get that.
Or nothing under the robe. That's the more common circumstance. Yeah. But when you get to a case like the U.S. versus Bond case, this was like by the time it got to the Supreme Court, I think it was Bond versus United States. But this was a case a couple of years ago. It was actually a chemical weapons case, right? But the whole notion was it was like a lover's quarrel. And a woman decided to put like a chemical irritant on a doorknob of her husband's paramour, right, or something along those lines, in order to like get revenge. And she was charged.
I love this case.
Right, and she's charged under the Chemical Weapons Act, and it's like you're like, whoa, the statute's never intended to encompass that. And so in a situation like that, if you're a defense attorney, you do need to go to the judge and you say, look, judge, this was sort of like a heat of the moment thing. Passions were running high. There was some infidelity here. And this was not intended to be like a poisoning case or a case in which somebody was going to die. She was just trying to poison her a little, like kind of like irritate her skin. And like, you're like, wow, I do need to moot these arguments, because if I don't moot that argument, I am going to get laughed out of court if I say she only meant to poison her a little. And so, but I think that based on what we've been talking about today, we've been talking about these cases that escalate and they get worse. You might have a homicide case, right, in which it's an accidental poisoning case or something like that. And I think FBI tries to cull those out, and they say they exclude some of those cases. But you're right that as you peel back the onion of most crimes, not just these silly ones you're talking about, even these homicides that are reflected in this data we've been talking about today, people by and large in the moment have a justification for their actions. As crazy as that justification may be, if you sit down and talk to a person, no matter how heinous the crime or how ridiculous the crime is or how ludicrous it looks in hindsight, we like to think of people as irrational actors, but they are rational actors. It's just that in hindsight and with cooler heads, things oftentimes look ridiculous. So that's why I like our court process, but at the same time, it's a problem because what you're touching on is these defenses may not play well with a judge. Some of this stuff never hears the light of day.
I will also point out that sometimes the truly asinine defense that your law professor will make you feel silly for saying works with a jury. People forget this, but the Twinkie defense in the case of Danny White, who murdered Harvey Milk, and as well as the mayor of San Francisco, Willie Moscone, worked. He successfully argued to a jury that he had gone temporarily insane by eating too many Twinkies. And I submit you have not said anything that stupid in your law school class to date. So keep working on it.
Ben, sometimes it works with a judge too. Let's not forget about affluenza.
That's true. Okay. Affluenza.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, like, I do think that it's all about the presentation. And like, I mean, if you present which he did it wasn't just the Twinkie defense. He didn't stand up and say it like that. Like, that's not how he said it. He actually was like, there was a spike in blood sugar. It made him crazy. It created this like it made him irrational. He wasn't in his right mind. And like, I just really want to point out that we joke about it as like the Twinkie defense, and it sounds really stupid, but that wasn't how it was presented. It was actually packaged in like a way to like exactly to kind of like don't make but generally speaking, Paula, because your other question was like, how can I be funnier? Do not like be funny in court, like generally speaking. really do not do it. You are like doing kind of the most serious thing to like kind of like, and in your role there as an attorney or a clerk or a judge or like whatever you end up being is like basically is like really there's just like not a place to make jokes. And
There's
it's
one circumstance where you can be funny in court during trial. In my experience, and believe me, I have a strong desire to be funny in court, and I have to fight it really hard. The only time that it works is when you're struggling with technology. I think, in my experience, the only time to be funny is when something is technologically going wrong and you're trying to fill a little bit of awkward space. Other than that, do not joke about the merits of any case ever.
I wasn't beating you up, Paula. I'm just like saying that was not like I understood that you meant on Twitter. I just was also just adding really like, for the record as like a good piece of advice, like because like Mike comes on and is always hilarious. And
not
like
today. Not today. This is
no.
like,
Today you're very sad. But generally speaking, is like is that basically that that this is a that this is that I was just kind of saying as a general rule. Okay, Ev is back. Let's with a mask on it. Hello, Ev.
Hey, do you hear me?
Yeah, you're kind of muffled.
Yeah, sorry. I was wondering, how do you think judicial statistics are? Do you feel like judicial statistics are important or gives a weird understanding of reality? And what can we learn from statistics? And should we work on having more statistics? Those kind of questions.
Great.
It is the old thing, right? Is that statistics are like whatever, what do they say? Like people say 70% of statistics are made up, or whatever. You always see this like recurring joke. I mean, the truth is we use them in sentencing memoranda a lot because we're talking about the question of recidivism. I think that is a good example of where statistics can be very valid in informing a judge, is to say, like, judge, like if I've got a defendant and he's 54 years old and he's married now and he's got a college education and he's got reliable employment waiting for him when he gets out of prison and he went the first 50 something years of his life without ever committing a crime, his likelihood of recidivism is like extraordinarily low. Sadly, if I've got somebody who's 19 and they've committed a crime, of violence, they got into a bar brawl and they beat somebody to death, the likelihood is that when they get out, if they're in their 20s and they get out, their likelihood of recidivism is much higher, right? Because that's just statistics. Now, sometimes they don't cut your way, and so you don't cite them in the sentencing brief. But the recidivism data that the United States Sentencing Commission has released has proven to hold true and been proven itself right for decades, right? And now there are good things and bad things about that, because a judge can say, look, you're in that category of somebody who's going to, repeat offend, so I'm just going to keep you locked up for a while. So there's good and bad, but I do think that by and large, I've been able to use recidivism statistics to shave years off of sentences, and I think a lot of other defense lawyers have had a similar experience.
I mean, so statistics are just about, I mean, like anything, they are only reflections of what you choose to measure. And so defining what you're going to so what you put in and what you take out are just as reflective. I mean, so yeah. So Ben,
I just want to say, anybody who is interested in criminal justice reform should pray for more and better statistics, because the only way you get the ability to de-incarcerate large numbers of people is to convince voters that they are not threatening. And that is fundamentally a data project.
Yeah.
You need the data. I mean, Mike is making that point about how you argue for a specific client, but my point is much broader. If you want to release a whole lot of people from prison or not incarcerate a whole lot of people for marijuana possession or distribution, you really need to be able to argue that there is not a high correlation between the use and possession of marijuana and other crime. And that was a case that was made over a long period of time, and I think made pretty successfully, and it required data to do it. And I think there is a similar effect with respect to de-incarceration of large numbers of African American men, that you can look at data and see disparities in the way certain crimes are sentenced, and you need data about those crimes in order to do it. And so I would just say the crime statistics, they're always a news event when they happen, but this is an uncommonly rich source of data, and we use it for all kinds of public policy announcements, and it's super, super important.
Yeah, totally. Mike, what is the one takeaway that we should think about besides kind of the things that we've talked about today? Is there something that we've missed in like kind of thinking about these statistics? Do you think that there's going to be the fear that like we're gonna like over rotate on them? Like that there's going to be just this massive, I mean, I don't know. What are you thinking?
I think that the data about crimes that are occurring are extremely latent. In other words, by the time that you can figure out what the data is telling you, it is far too late to really do anything about it, right? Love him or hate him, Tom Cruise made a great movie called Minority Report, where we were living in an imaginary world in which we had precogs that could tell us about a crime that was going to occur before it occurred, and we could stop it. And there was all sorts of ethical problems related to that. But I think by the time that we're actually looking at this data, the circumstances that have given rise to these have passed. I think that they've passed. And yes, we are seeing an increase now. We saw a precipitous drop since 1994. Okay, that's all good. I think that the more important statistics that we should be focusing on are what do we do about it, right? What kind of results do we get from those people that end up then now passing through the criminal justice system? The best statistic that I will cite in every brief that I ever write for the rest of my life is the statistic about the meaningful impact of length of incarceration. After 12 months of incarceration, after 1 year of incarceration, length of sentence has effectively no impact on recidivism, period. Now, whether a person is going to commit a crime again or not commit a crime again, after they've served that 13th month, it's the same if they serve 48 months, it's the same if they serve 72 months. You can take a huge chunk of a person's life or a year of their life and get effectively the same result from imprisonment. I think that should inform us more, because it teaches us about what we should do with the people that we're going to be sending to prison, the people we're going to be, depriving of their liberty, justified or unjustified. And then also we're going to see another statistic, which is about the effect of education while people are incarcerated. So people who leave prison after having any modicum of education, whether it be through, effectively a remote college program, you're going to see another precipitous drop in recidivism. So I think that we should be looking at those statistics. In terms of crimes that have already happened, I think that they're a product of the past, and we always have to look at increasing economic opportunity and prosperity, and increasing education and economic stability and community attachment, and you're going to see a drop in crime. That is my view, and I don't think the FBI statistics tell us about that one way or the other.
So Ev has a really great follow-up question. I'm just going to read it just because it's easier and running out of time. She asks, that is actually a perfect follow-up to your point, which is, are there any stats we should not collect? And I think this is I think that's kind of fascinating. Can you think of any?
I like information. I think we should collect every statistic there is. I think context is what is most important. Now, we say statistics. I think what we're really talking about is data, right? I think we should capture as much data as possible. Statistics are how we communicate data. Statistics are sort of...
Yeah.
And you know what I think probably my problem is, that I think that we cram too much data into pie charts. That is the problem. Pie charts lie to you all the time.
We also isolate individual statistics instead of looking at aggregate patterns of data. The murder chart that I showed over time looks very different if you look at it in isolation than if you look at it in the context of the overall crime, same chart for overall violent crime over time. If you look at it over a long period of time, if you look at it over a short period of time. And people, as you pointed out at the beginning of the conversation, people want to take these data events and draw very quick policy conclusions from them. Joe Biden sucks, Kayleigh McEnany says, because crime's on the rise, and she deletes the tweet when she actually is pointed out to her that this is a rise that took place while she was in the White House.
That's right.
You know, on the other hand, people want to draw very specific policy conclusions from it that it won't support. I think a holistic, you know, and one area that we have very bad data is on gun-related matters, because, you know, Congress doesn't let the executive keep gun prevalence data. So, I mean, there's a, you know, the problem is not insufficient. The problem is not too much data. The problem is insufficient data.
I would just say, as one parting note, statistics in large part gave us the crack powder disparity. And that has been ruinous. Absolutely ruinous.
Yep.
And
I was
so
going to
I
also
would
say, like, there's like, and there's all types of insinuations from that, like the crack baby epidemic, like the crack baby, the false crack baby pandemic, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just thinking about how much I hate the crack baby myth. Like, and that they're just like, in general, I just, they largely understood to be true things that are completely false. And like, I just can't get it, like, correct those often enough. We are going to leave it there. Mike Chase, you're a great Canadian.
This was hilarious. This was my funniest performance.
Screamingly funny.
We'll be back. No, I actually did. I had a great time. I always have a great time when you come on the show. This was really great. I think that there's, I don't know. I would be interested to see what, if anything, kind of happens in response to this. So, I mean, and then we'll have to have you back on, because maybe there will be more federal crimes for you to write about.
Yeah, I think the big story here is that cheese crimes were relatively flat. Piracy issues relatively flat. There was no notable spike in boarding ships illegally, or
there are federal crimes happening in my apartment building probably right now, apparently. So, like,
private walrus bartering remains at historic lows.
Puffin smuggling, puffin smuggling.
And all this proves that not enough people have bought Mike Chase's book, How to Become a Federal Criminal. Y'all need to buy it and learn your lessons properly, so that next year we can jack up those numbers in the FBI. They'll have to start a new walrus crimes
just for
section.
Us.
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay, we will be back exactly 23 hours from now? 23 hours from now. And until then, Ben?
We don't have fun anymore, and we don't even have an uptick in walrus bartering in the data. So we'll have to be satisfied with increased murder.